Welcome to the OCall podcast. Today we're talking about the engineer branch and the EBOLC experience. Today I got Alec with me. He's a 12 Alpha Sapper Tabbed engineer officer, and he's going to give us some insight.
Thank you, Josh. I'm glad to be here. I think it's really cool what you're doing with this channel and perpetuating some really knowledgeable, some very important information that every officer can utilize.
Thank you.
So I'm Alec. I am a engineer officer in the Army, a 12 Alpha.
Nice.
And I currently do combat engineering.
Okay.
So I am a sapper platoon leader currently. I have Bradleys, which are Bradley fighting vehicles. They're kind of a derivative of the tank, but they don't have the same capabilities. But those are like our main fighting platforms. So a lot of our life revolves around those vehicles, without a doubt.
Little baby tanks, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you know quite a bit about them with your background.
Yeah. So Alec, why did you choose engineers?
So that is a great question, Josh. So I'm an engineer by trade.
Nice.
I studied engineering in college, and I was inspired to pursue engineering as a career because of my father. He was also a mechanical engineer, not in the military, but a mechanical engineer by trade. And so that's what I studied in college. And so my first couple of years in college, I didn't even pay much mind to the Army. I tried out ROTC, which was my commissioning source.
Okay.
And I kind of just showed up. I tried to see what it was all about. I picked the brain of the cadre, and they just got me interested in the Army. And then as I learned more about the Army, I learned more about the engineering side of the Army. And since I was already studying engineering, I thought, well, this matches up. Yeah, it matches up perfectly. And so with that said, with my cadre being engineers, I just grew a love for what the engineer officer does and their responsibilities and the kind of day in the life, I guess, of an engineer officer is very interesting.
Nice. So speaking of day in the life, did you get to do like CTLT with engineers or anything like that?
So yeah, I did utilize an opportunity to take advantage of the CTLT experience, which is basically like an internship in the summertime between your junior and senior year. So I did it directly after CST as well.
Nice.
So it's 4 weeks long, and I got to basically embed myself in a engineer unit, an active duty engineer unit in the Army. I was down at Fort Bliss, and I got to just see what it was like to be an officer and an engineer officer, right? So I kind of widened my perspective on what it meant to be an officer in the active duty Army and kind of see what the engineer officer does on a daily basis. And it was a very similar unit to the unit I'm in now too. So I got to really learn and really help me make a final decision on what I wanted to do with my career after getting out of college. So.
Yeah, so after you graduated and you commissioned to the Army, you went to EBOLC. We're going to talk about that here shortly. So what can you tell me about the different types of engineers in the Army?
Yeah, so there's the combat engineering side of things, which is what I'm involved in right now. But the engineers, which is another reason why I was so interested in the branch, is they're very versatile. Yep. They're kind of like seen as the Swiss Army knife of the military or of the Army, right? They have construction capabilities. So we have a platoon in the battalion that I'm in where they have dozers, so earth movers. It's considered horizontal construction, basically, where you're digging hurl defilade positions, turret defilade positions. You're remediating ranges after they've been messed up by tanks and such. You're building areas where you can build a foundation from. So you're clearing out land. You're flattening landscapes so that other engineers who are vertical engineers can come in and build those foundations for like FOBs or just like temporary holding areas for soldiers and stuff like that.
So then the vertical, that'd be more like construction.
Yeah.
Are there any like on the enlisted side? I know there's like a plethora of MOSs, like wood engine electricians, stuff like that, firefighters, engineers.
There's divers too.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of jobs within the engineer corps that involve different things. Like they're very different in what they do on their day to day.
But as an Army officer, as an engineer, you have to like learn how to manage and use any of those different things.
Basically,
right?
yes.
Okay.
Yep. And then we can go into that discussion in the BOLC discussion because at Engineer BOLC, they kind of try to teach you generally what each of these different aspects entail within the engineer corps.
So what kind of mission sets and capabilities does your sapper platoon currently have?
So we focus around we focus more around counter mobility and mobility.
Okay.
So what that means is counter mobility is obstacle emplacement, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of EA development, engagement area development. It's basically stopping the enemy in their tracks before they even ever reach whatever element is there to protect or engage them, right?
And you might try to either like fix them into a position so we can attack them, turn them into another like minefield, or like disrupt their movement. There's different kinds of
obstacles and
exactly. So do you guys do any kind of like demolition or any of that cool guy stuff?
Yeah. So demo can be counter mobility and mobility. So I guess to further discuss it, I'd have to discuss it in pieces because counter mobility is its own section and it has their own duties and responsibilities that entail that mission set. And then mobility has its own responsibilities and duties that entail that mission set.
Okay. Right? Yeah, that'd be good to do.
So like craters and shape charges, right? So those are used for counter mobility because it's meant to basically like disrupt the movement of travel of an enemy force. You're basically blowing giant holes in the ground so that a vehicle can't surpass it, it can't bypass it.
Right.
But when it comes to mobility, well, that's a lot of demo that in breaching that you just mentioned, right? So if you have an obstacle that's been in place by the enemy, well, then that's also our job to breach that obstacle, right? And so like for my platoon in particular, we're trained to do those things. We are trained to use, for example, Bangalores to breach C-wire, and we're also trained to find mines and stuff like that. And that kind of feeds into what we're talking about now is how engineers enable, because that's really what our job is. It's to enable the maneuver, right? Enable what you used to do, right? Like as a scout, you were the guys that we would help kind of facilitate your job, basically, right? Like you guys are the ones that engage the enemy. We allow you to engage the enemy by getting rid of any obstruction that's in your way, basically.
Yeah, so when I went to EBOLC, we didn't get to work directly with engineers. However, we had to learn how to work with engineers. So like when we're in a screen and we're waiting for the enemy to come towards us, we would go out, do our EA dev, and then part of that EA dev is in placing obstacles. So that's when we call up the engineers. They'd be either digging like the turret or hull defilades, and then they'd either go out and mark and do a lane for the F poles or R poles, the passage of lines anyways, or in place obstacles. So that's kind of interesting that you bring that up.
Yeah, EA development is a huge aspect of our job, right? Because EA development encompasses the maneuver side too, right? Because you guys are the ones with the firepower. And so we're setting conditions for you guys to best engage the enemy, basically.
Yeah.
With our capabilities and digging hole defilade position. And I don't even know if the audience might not even know what a hole defilade position is, but it's basically a hole that a tank can roll into, and it's providing cover up to the hole. And so the turret is exposed, and the downside of that is the turret is exposed. But if you have a turret defilade position, now you have a hole that has multiple levels to it. So like when they roll up to it, the turret is covered, but then when they push up slightly, or ever so slightly, then it becomes a hole defilade position. So it's kind of like different. So it depends on like the amount of time you have to build these and dig these, and it just depends on the intent, the commander's intent.
Fuel consumption, there's a lot that goes into it, right?
Yeah. So just to further detail on what my platoon and how it is broken down. Like I said, we have 4 Bradleys. A lot of our day-to-day revolves around the maintenance and upkeep of our Bradley fighting vehicles because they're our main fighting platform. So everything we do in training, if we're overseas, I mean, our medal revolves around our Bradleys, right? They bring us to the breach. They allow us to maneuver on the battlefield.
And real quick, the medal, that's the mission essential tasking list, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And so that's basically a list of our responsibilities and duties as a separate platoon, right? And so that goes along with what we were saying before with counter mobility and mobility, which are 2 things that we focus on. Whereas we can go into the discussion now of what the other platoons are and how they're made up and what their capabilities are.
Nice.
The engineer support platoon, they have armored breaching vehicles. So it's just kind of like this all-purpose vehicle. It looks kind of like an Abrams. It's got a mine plow on the front. It has MICLA capabilities. You can do lane marking with it as well. It's basically just this all-purpose vehicle that allows you to breach obstacles effectively.
Nice.
They have AVLBs as well. But basically what this vehicle does is it deploys a bridge tactically in a combat environment. So The AVLBs in particular has the chassis of an Abrams.
M60.
M60 has a chassis of an M60. The Jabs have the chassis of an Abrams.
Yes.
We are a couple
version.
generations behind.
Correct.
Yeah, our shit's old. But yeah, so basically it launches a bridge across like a crossing of some kind, some kind of gap crossing to allow the maneuver to then safely go across. Because obviously this gap is significant enough where you can't bypass and a vehicle can't safely cross it without damaging itself. And so that's when the AVLB will come in and provide that mobility. They also have dozers, which are the horizontal construction side of the engineer corps. They are used for digging, right? Digging a hole defilade position or turret defilade position for basically manipulating the land to best be used for whatever the commander's intent is. So it can be used for flattening and clearing so that for the future you can build a foundation of some kind for bases and such.
You might even flatten an area for like a mortar firing position or something like that.
Exactly. For FA assets, stuff like that. Yep. And then they also have graders as well. So like a grader is used for grading soil, grading the ground so that it's at a certain level to be used at.
Nice.
A certain elevation or whatever it is.
So that's two platoons that we've talked about so far. Are there any others?
Oh, yeah. So there's also the rock clearance platoon. So they deal with basically finding IEDs. They were used heavily, obviously, they were used heavily in Afghanistan and Iraq in the last 20 years. They would be deployed to find, improvised explosive devices along routes that were being utilized by a maneuver and being utilized by our friendly forces. And they have very specifically designed vehicles to take blasts. So they're expected to come across bombs and potentially take a heavy blow to the bottom of the vehicle. And so their design, this V-shaper design, is meant to dissipate the blast as it comes up
and out
and keep
instead
the crew
of
safe.
lifting it, right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
But they have plenty of assets that are used for finding bombs and disposing of them.
Do they have any robots or anything cool sci-fi like that?
Well, actually, my platoon has robots.
Oh, nice.
So engineers in general use robots for different things. So we use them for finding bombs and kind of doing what we can to dispose of them without EOD's assistance. So most of the time you would just use EOD.
Right.
But the engineers do have some responsibility in dealing with bombs too. I mean, I have people in my platoon who are EOCA trained. So EOCA is a specific engineer course where it teaches soldiers how to properly dispose bombs. So kind of do the job of the explosive ordnance disposal people, but not to the extent that their training is.
Nice.
Yeah.
I did not know that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, you have vertical construction platoons. Okay. So vertical construction is basically building buildings, right? So it's bases, it's some kind of foundation, latrines, whatever it might be to support personnel.
Yeah, but the verticals, they might also fortify existing buildings or I don't know, freaking guard shacks and stuff like that. So with that, let's pivot. We're going to start talking about EBOLC. So Alec, tell me about your EBOLC experience. Where was that and how long was it?
Yeah, so the Engineer Basic Officer Leadership course is held at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And it's a 4-month course, about 4.5 months. And you're basically fully immersed into what it means to be an engineer officer. They basically teach you all those different things that we've just discussed that encompass the engineer corps, and they give you kind of a generalized surface layer understanding of those responsibilities and what those soldiers are capable of doing.
Okay. So you mentioned it's 4.5 months. Does that make it a PCS or a TDY and route course?
It's TDY for most ROTC students. So if you're there for just the duration of the school, then you're TDY. You're just temporary duty status. But there are people from, say, West Point who might be PCS because they're there for longer than the school's duration.
Interesting.
Because they get there a bit earlier. Yeah, so for the engineer bullet, kind of how it's broken down is you start with basically the basic soldiering skills. So I'm not sure how other bullocks are managed, but I'd assume that most bullocks are probably similar to that, where you kind of go over land navigation, you do weapons qual, you do a PT test, you go over some very basic stuff that you do in ROTC or West Point too, but they're kind of just trying to solidify those things to build like a baseline to go from.
Nice.
And so once you get through all those like basic things, then you start to get into like the bread and butter of Army engineering.
Kind of like the AIT portion of the course, right?
Yeah. And they start off with kind of the engineer field work. So they start off with like the demo, prepping charges, how to in place obstacles in the field. You do like how to build bridges in the field. So we do like a Bailey bridge. We build it from scratch as a class. It takes like a few hours.
What is that exactly?
It's just this bridge of trusses that you make out of all these different tools that you're given, all these different materials, and you build it and then you deploy it across like a gap.
Okay, I'll try and find an image and then like put it on the screen because I don't even know what this thing looks like.
Yeah. But we do that as a class as part of our training, and then once we kind of get done with like the engineer field work, and there's also an FTX embedded into that too, where we're in the field with the cadre, and we're doing a lot of like the 12 Bravo, the 12, mostly 12 Bravo stuff, which is the combat engineer MOS of the Army. So like those are the guys who are doing like the groundwork once you're actually in the service. Like once you're actually at your unit, those are the guys like doing all like the manual labor in terms of like prepping charges, breaching the obstacles.
So basically the soldiers.
But they want you as an officer to get that experience a little bit in BOLC.
And those are basically the soldiers that you have in your platoon right now.
Yeah, so my platoon is made up of only 12 Bravos.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So after you do the FTX portion, or actually while you're in the FTX, do you have to do any kind of like op wards or any of that stuff, or how's that?
Yeah, once we finish kind of like the soldiering aspect of the training pipeline, we get into more of the officer side of things. So after we finish this like field engineer work, the next phase of the school is more of the officer side of things. So like MD&P.
Okay.
They teach you about important doctrine. You take a lot of written evaluations on your ability to find things in doctrine. Nice. So like they'll give you like problem statements on like what is this and how would you attack it, and then you find that information in the doctrine that they provide you. And so it's teaching you like how to organize yourself and how to organize the doctrine that you'll be using as an officer all the time, because you can't memorize everything, right?
Right.
That's unreasonable and it's not practical. And so what they're trying to do is teach you how to use the doctrine for your advantage. And so that's a big part of this schoolhouse, right? But yeah, we do MD&P sessions where we're going through the different MD&P processes like mission analysis, and we break down into like the different staff sections as like a notional thing, and then learn on working with one another. Because as an engineer officer, you'll find yourself working on staff and being part of that higher echelon planning. So
I think that's every officer MOS, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you'll never be exempt from that. Right. And so they try to expose you to that while you're at BOLC, that staff side of things.
Nice. And
then once you're done with that, you go into the more project management side of things. And this is where you also get exposure to the construction side of engineering as well. So like the horizontal, the vertical construction, and they teach you about like dig rates. They teach you about, different strategies and different tools that you would use to understand your soldiers' capabilities and the capabilities of your equipment, and how you would brief that to a maneuver commander.
Yeah, like consumption rates.
As part of the planning.
That means. Like
exactly.
The what the thing is and the so what behind it, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
But then you go into like project management, right? So like engineers are all project managers too. So they teach you how to use like a Gantt chart, for example.
What's that?
A Gantt chart is just a way, and it's a Microsoft suite that you can utilize. It's a way to organize your planning, the process of your planning. So you put in your soldiers, you put in the dates that you have for your project, and the equipment you have. It's all in this singular system that helps you manage your project. I mean, it's used in the civilian world too. It's a very common tool used by project managers to help kind of have foresight on or oversight over what to expect as they go into their project.
Yeah, so I will say, obviously, engineers, but like the civilian side of things, when you get out of the military, what does being an Army officer in the engineer corps set you up for on the civilian side? Or like what kind of skills can you bring to the civilian sector when you get out?
So definitely that project management side of things that you get that experience with in BOLC, and then also as you get into your career too, is probably the most applicable to the civilian world, because a project manager at a company is a valuable asset, right? The person who manages personnel and the project itself, and knows how to bring together different skills and different attributes to create this like collaborative kind of team environment. And you learn how to do that you learn how to do that as an officer, I think, but definitely as an engineer, they expose you the most to that, I think.
Okay.
That skill set.
So to kind of summarize, basically what you're saying is the enlisted would be more, because they are specialized, they would be able to do more of like the engineer-specific things on the civilian side, but being an Army officer as an engineer, you're learning more of like the big picture type stuff you do in the engineers, like project management. Is that accurate?
I don't know if that's necessarily accurate. I mean, when you say engineer-specific things in the civilian world, I don't really know what that means.
Okay.
Because like an engineer, like a civilian engineer can mean a lot of things.
That's fair.
Right? Like I studied mechanical engineering, so like a mechanical engineer at a company is not doing anything that we do in the Army.
That's fair.
And vice versa.
Yeah. I don't know anything about engineering, so like I don't know like what the right questions are to ask. So this is good. This is good. I'm learning right now.
Yeah. So like when you say like soldiers can do like the specific engineer stuff, I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily say like that's the truth or not.
Okay.
What they do is as part of their job as a combat engineer is specific to the Army's requirements. I wouldn't even know what they would do in the civilian world, to be honest. Like prepping a charge. I don't think there's any civilian job that entails that.
Contracting.
Not to like necessarily shit on the soldiers or anything like that, but as an officer, like what's applicable to the civilian world is definitely that project management side. Mm-hmm. And like we have to be competent in those things that the soldiers are responsible for because we oversee their training and we plan their training, right? Mm-hmm. And so how would we plan these things if we didn't understand what the hell was going on, right?
Right.
As an officer, you're kind of like a jack of all trades in a way.
Mm-hmm.
You're not really necessarily good at one specific thing. You're just kind of good enough at everything to know how to utilize people and how to utilize their skills for the mission at hand.
Nice. That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
So do you have any advice that you would give to lieutenants that are about to go to EBOLC or cadets interested in the BOLC branch? Like prepping for BOLC specifically.
Oh, okay. The BOLC branch. I thought that was interesting.
What did I say?
What do you
So then do you have any advice that you would give to any engineers getting ready to go to BOLC or cadets that are interested in the engineer branch?
Yeah, so for the engineer BOLC specifically, there are some things that you probably should brush up on before you come. Definitely navigation is one. Mm-hmm. I will say if you have a background in engineering in college, the math portion of BOLC will not be hard for you.
Nice.
It'll be. I mean, it's just arithmetic, basic. It's basic algebra, basic geometry. I mean, it's Army math is definitely nothing to be
nothing like 8th grade level or whatever.
Yeah, it's nothing to be worried over. But if you're somebody who's not done math in a long time mm-hmm. and maybe is coming from a background in college where you didn't use math for your degree, which happens. I mean, there are people in the engineer branch on the officer side who, have degrees in criminal justice or political science or whatever. And they're studying whatever it is those degrees entail, but it's not math, right?
Can confirm.
And so they come and they haven't looked at algebra since high school.
Right.
And so maybe for those people who are not doing math in college, it would behoove you to probably do a bit of math before you come. Like at least brush up on the basic arithmetic, mm-hmm. Like algebra, basic geometry.
Like learn any knots, or is that more like sapper school stuff or?
Nah, you don't really need to. Okay. If you want to be high speed, you can review like basic knots. I mean, if you did like the Ranger Challenge team in college, that would definitely help out a lot.
Okay.
Because the knots you use in the Ranger Challenge team are definitely some of the same knots you use mm-hmm. in the engineer world, like the square knot, the bowline, mm-hmm. and then be in good shape too. Physical fitness is a very important aspect of being an officer, and mm-hmm. you will have physical evaluations at BOLC too. I didn't even mention any of those. Like you have a 12-mile ruck at the engineer BOLC. Mm-hmm. So definitely show up in like somewhat rucking shape, like be in good shape.
All right, so now you know about the engineer branch and the BOLC experience. Click on this video next to learn about sapper school and how to prepare for it.